He likes to live in solitude. They hunt, train and eat together. But one day his whole life changes when a knight in armor comes to the tower and kills his grandfather and then leaves Percy to die next to him. Percy survives and swears revenge, after which he leaves the tower and goes on a dangerous journey. Percy runs through the expanses of his house and notices a giant monster bird flying in the sky. He runs up to the edge of the cliff and sees his grandfather working in the field and asks him to quickly catch the bird because usually they don't meet at such a height. Grandfather is also surprised, but he immediately finds his rake and with incredible speed throws it at the bird, piercing it in the chest. The bird begins to fall to the ground and Percy, not knowing why, jumps on it, grabs it by the neck and almost falls from the tower, while his grandfather runs after him and sees how he clings to the ledge holding the bird. They return to their small house and Percy takes the sword with which he easily cuts the bird. The sword seems to be 2 times more. His grandfather praises him for his skill and they fry the bird together, enjoying every bite of this huge stupid chicken and then go to bed the next morning, both shirtless, ready for training. Percy attacks his grandfather, who is pumped up on steroids. Grandfather quickly blocks Percy's path with a massive fist. Percy, agile as always, jumps to the side and again rushes at grandfather, surprised to realize that he does not feel the ground under his feet. And to his grandfather, Dushka, grouping him, lifts him into the air and playfully throws it aside. Percy falls to the ground and begins to be indignant that he will never be able to defeat his grandfather. The massive figure calms him down by saying that this time he had to use a little real strength and Percy rejoices at his little victory. Meanwhile, the muscular grandfather heads to a beautiful cave. Reflecting on the rapid growth of the Persian, sitting by the stream, he absent-mindedly picks up the cup but remembers that tomorrow is Percy's birthday. He hurries out of the cave, climbs up a rock and returns home without finding Percy is in sight. He walks behind the house and sees him peeing. Grandpa joyfully shouts that tomorrow is Percy's birthday, but Percy remains unperturbed. Percy, not paying attention, asks how old he will be tomorrow. Grandpa says that tomorrow he will turn 16 years old and that will mean that he has become an adult in this world. Percy is still peeing, excitedly asks if this means that now he can drink with Grandpa, but Grandpa tells him that even in this medieval world, the age for drinking alcohol is higher than in the UK. Percy, oblivious, is still peeing, asks about his birthday present. Grandfather tells him to follow him and leads him to the rock. When they climb to the top of the rock, Grandfather looks at the endless sky full of clouds and invites Percy to travel the world to see its wonders. Percy with an indifferent smile replies that he doesn't care about the world, which shocks his grandfather. The old man does not believe his ears, remembering his youth when he left home at 16 to become a real man. Percy answers that every day in the tower is an adventure for him, and he likes it here. Grandfather shows to the sky and talks about a small island where the sky people supposedly live. This island created by the goddesses floats in the sky, hiding its wonders from the world below. Percy asks why grandfather himself has never been there, but he replies that he can't fly, but he had enough adventures and secrets in Britain, the huge continent under the clouds where their tower stands. Excited by his grandfather's stories about the snake-like towers of heavenly travels, a cave in hell, an enchanted lake and a magical forest, Percy not showing a particular interest is going to catch fish later in their cozy house. The appetizing smell of fried fish is in the air and Percy eats with pleasure. Grandfather, who looks a little like a Russian, talks about how Percy's father went on a trip at the age of 16 and asks what Percy knows about his father. Percy is asked to tell more, but grandfather immediately changes the subject and asks if Percy feels lonely. Percy quickly replies that he is not at all lonely, because grandfather is always nearby. Grandfather is a little embarrassed and again changes the topic of conversation. Percy is sitting next to him, warm fire and doing wood carving, as if by chance. He suggests that they go the next day to hunt for large rocky lizards. Grandpa Percy, completely drunk, begins muttering familiar quotes claiming that this is just a reminder for himself. He chuckles at Percy and asks about his plans. When he grows up, Percy smiles, expressing his determination to become strong, to protect the weak, and be willing to sacrifice everything to protect his family. Grandfather agrees with the answer, laughs and playfully challenges Percy, saying that he is not that old and does not need protection from a small guy like him. When midnight comes, Percy and his grandfather fall on the bed and seem to fall asleep. However, Percy is not sleeping. He sneaks out of the house and sits on the edge of a cliff looking at the full moon in the cloudy sky. Excited by the adventures awaiting the flight, he tumbled down the slope with his face buried in the ground. Reality overtakes him on foot when he realizes that he cannot just leave for Britain because he does not want to leave his grandfather alone. He is saddened by this. He falls asleep and he dreams that his grandfather standing in the distance and does not hear him no matter how close he is approached. Suddenly, he wakes up on the ground surrounded by fog. Rubbing his eyes, Percy hears a sound and sees man in bright red armor approaching on a flying boat. Shocked watches as a knight dressed in red parks the boat at the edge of the tower and lands on the ground. The knight is surprised that his scouting bar died in the area. Delighted to meet a knight on a ghostly boat, Percy impatiently asks if he is the one sailing through the sky. The knight, who seems to be in the mood, greets Percy in a friendly manner and asks if he lives here with anyone. Percy happily replies that he lives with his grandfather. The knight says that he is an old friend of Percy's grandfather and asks where he is now. Percy excitedly points to the hill, claiming that his grandfather is preparing breakfast. He asks the knight if he can get on the boat and look. The knight agrees, and Percy, watching him walk towards the house, he suddenly feels that some kind of sinister aura is coming from the knight, which sends a chill down his spine. He thinks that it is just imagination and turns his attention to the boat, admiring it and trying to ride on it, but realizing that he cannot move it from its place. He thinks that it is because he is not a knight. He begins to wonder what a knight is, because his grandfather never explained this to him. Suddenly he is overcome by fear. When he remembers the strange sensation he felt from the knight, he immediately jumps off the boat and runs to the house, feeling that something is wrong and that his grandfather may be in danger. Meanwhile, Grandfather Percy was cutting vegetables for breakfast when he heard footsteps behind him. He got scared and took a defensive stance, blocking the knight's attack, but was still thrown into the house. Grandfather gets up and rushes at the knight with a sword in his hand, but he easily repels all the blows and then uses magic and strikes grandfather with a sword, which hits and the house behind him. Blood is gushing out of his body from his mouth. But the grandfather does not give up when they hear Percy's scream from the cliff. Percy tells the knight to underscore off and stop torturing his grandfather. The knight immediately responds with an airstrike that blows a big one away, a piece of rock, and tells Percy to shut up, otherwise he will be next. Percy gets angry and grabs a stone before jumping down and throwing it at the knight, who immediately destroys it with magic. Percy goes down and grabs an even bigger stone before throwing it at the man in crimson armor, but it is no use as he just uses an airstrike to cut the stone into several pieces, and the same thing happens to Grandpa, who goes into a rage and grabs the knight, telling him to run, and Percy shouts that he won't leave without him. The knight tells them to shut up because they will both die before they use their magic blow on his grandfather, who falls to the ground covered in blood and with so many wounds that even duct tape won't save his life. Percy didn't even realize what happened. The knight turns to him and uses her magic to hit him with a powerful blow that even cuts the mountain behind him. Percy begins to bleed and is about to fall, but regains his balance and walks towards the knight, trying to hit him, but in such a way in a weakened state. This does not help, and the knight pushes him away with his foot. The grandfather asks the knight why he came here to kill him, and the knight replies that a couple of days ago there was a prophecy that the four knights who are now in this world will unite and overthrow King Arthur because they can't risk. They were ordered to kill everyone who has not sworn allegiance to the crown. He says that the details are unknown to him, but he was ordered to act on his own. Grandfather asks if he has even a drop of conscience because he just killed his little grandson, but the knight replies that it is for the greater good and leaves. Grandfather tries to sit down and sees that the Persian is still alive. He slowly and with difficulty approaches grandfather. He apologizes for not being able to protect him and for being so helpless, and grandfather says that his job is to protect the young and not the other way around. They hug and cry, and his grandfather consoles him and falls to the ground. He tells Percy to listen carefully and explains that the knight he just saw was none other than his own father, known as the Iron God. He cannot explain the whole situation because he has little time left, but he tells Percy to find the knight because only he can explain everything to him. He puts his hand on Percy's head for the last time and says that he will always watch over him before he falls dead. Percy spends the night in a ruined house, and the next morning he digs a grave to bury his grandfather. Then he collects some turnips in the garden and sits down to dinner all alone. He spends several days sorting out their things and finds a small chest with clothes and a note from his grandfather. He realizes that his grandfather sewed these clothes to give him for his birthday when Percy is ready for adventure. Several days pass and he burns about his grandfather. He finally decides to move on. Then he puts on grandfather's helmet and takes everything he needs first. Then to set off because he is finally ready to face the world, he begins to descend from the tower, and although he has been descending all day, he still sees nothing but clouds. He spends the night on a ledge and the next morning he sets out. Again this time, he finally sees the earth and in the distance a kingdom. With joy he falls from the ledge. Fortunately, he lands on the back of a bird, but you know that from now on he promises to become a vegan. The bird still throws him off and he falls face first into a pile of trees and then splashes to the ground. He is still glad that he at least came down when he hears someone's footsteps and sees one of the ugliest dog cats had ever seen. Percy is amazed by the sight of this creature and tries to talk to it because he has never seen anything like it on the rock where he lived. For several minutes he tries to ask the creature if it knows where to find people like him because he is new here. The dog just turns his head and leaves, but even after being ignored he continues to follow him, which scares the dog and he runs away with all her might, and the strange boy in the helmet is still chasing her. The dog picks up speed and hides in the forest, leaving Percy alone. Percy is still trying to follow her and makes his way through the bushes when he finally notices people sitting by the cart. 3 friends seem to be artists and are rehearsing the acts, while a fat man named Coates shows his hands full of scraps of paper and throws them into the air. Scraps of paper immediately light up and fall to the ground, and his friend named Telva shows tricks with her monkey using the hoop. As soon as she passes a hoop through her hand, the monkey disappears, but also mysteriously appears, and the hoop is removed. Finally, he turns to their last companion named Danny, but notices that he doesn't even take it seriously and is just resting on the cart. Freddy tells Dana that he needs to take this seriously, but he replies that there is no one here who could see it, so why waste energy if they don't get anything. Elva says that they can only train when no one is around, but Danny replies that he doesn't need to train to perform. Unlike me, who can't perform at night, no matter how much I practice. Suddenly, they hear someone clapping their hands and they turn around to see Percy, who is looking at their performance in amazement because it really intrigued him. They approach him and he dances around them and says that it was cool and he wants to watch it again because he has never seen this before. Elva and Freddy think that this guy is from somewhere far away. Donnie doesn't misses the opportunity to make money and approaches him demanding money because he saw their performance, which was free. Elva protests. Donnie says that they need to buy food and for this they need money. Percy doesn't know what money and how it works, and this infuriates Donnie, but he tells Percy that if he doesn't have money and he will pay with things. Percy hands him a bag full of necessary things and Donnie takes out a dagger and says that he will finish the show, and Percy begins to float in the air. He is completely confused but very glad that he can do something like that and asks Donnie how he did it, but to his surprise Donnie and his friends leave him hanging in the air and they take his things on their cart. Donnie seems pleased with himself and Elva tells him what he is like. Donnie replies that everyone should know how to behave in the real world and that he just gave him a try, but Elvis continues to mock him, saying that the guys don't seem to know how the world works at all. Donnie starts to feel a little guilty and wonders if he should stop and go back to give Percy his things, but before he can make a decision, Percy runs up to their cart with such incredible speed that it shocks everyone. Donnie immediately hands him a bag, but to his surprise, instead of getting angry, Percy simply asks how he can find someone in this world. They don't understand who he's talking about and ask who he wants to meet. Percy is silent for a bit and then answers that he wants to find a person named. When they ask who this Ironside is, Percy's mood deteriorates and he remembers what happened in his past, including how the knight who was supposed to be his father mercilessly killed his grandfather and then even tried to kill Percy, who was supposed to be his only son. Fatty sympathizes with him and asks if he wants to take revenge. But Percy replies that he doesn't know why he's trying to find this person, but says that his grandfather, before his death, said that Ironside knows the answers to all his questions. Fatty and Alva say that unfortunately, none of them knows anyone with that name, but Fatty says that if he goes to the neighboring villages, he might be able to find out something. Percy doesn't seem to understand what a village is, but suddenly he remembers that his grandfather said that in the villages, people live together in harmony. Fatty even extends a helping hand to him and says that they can take him to the nearest village. Donnie stops in and asks how he is going to repay them for this, but Percy doesn't know, and Donnie asks if he can do anything and soon gives him a bow and arrows. Percy takes them and aims at an apple hanging on a wooden beam, but to everyone's surprise the arrows fly the other way and almost kills Danny. After that they all ride together in a cart, and Fatty says that he doesn't need to worry because they are free. They will take him to the nearest village. He explains that they are performers who travel around the continent and give performances in towns and villages to earn a living. It seems that Percy was really fascinated, but Donnie interferes and that there is nothing to be proud of after all. They are just a bunch of losers who could not become real knights. Smiles sadly and tells Percy that they went through a lot together and should have become knights, but their hopes and dreams were crushed, and now they are just performing in the circus. Suddenly the villagers run up to them villages and ask for help, saying that a wolf is rampaging in their village and they need to turn to the knights. But Percy doesn't know what a wolf is. What kind of animal this is? Donnie laughs and says that there is no need to call the knights because they can easily deal with a wolf. He grabs the horse's reins and rushes to the village, although does not support his decision. But Donnie explains that this could be an opportunity to get free food and an overnight stay in the village. To their surprise, the wolf turns out to be a huge monster that towers over the houses of the residents. Donnie decides that they need to call the knights. Elva tells Donnie that they cannot abandon the villagers, and Percy immediately jumps out of the cart and runs straight to the wolf. Remembering the words of his grandfather about defeating evil and protecting the weak, Percy aims at the wolf with his bow, but the arrows hit his helmet and the wolf attacks Percy. Donnie saves him at the last moment, taking the blow upon himself. Seeing that Donnie is wounded, Percy asks he risked his life for him. Donnie replies that he saw how Percy bravely rushed into battle and this gave him strength. The wolf rushes at Percy again, but he stops him with one hand. Then he jumps up and hits the wolf, from which he falls to the ground and dies. The villagers are amazed by the size of the wolf and consider this a bad omen, not understanding what this means. Meanwhile, a bandaged Donnie, who is in great pain. Donnie says that there is no need to worrying about him and asks where Percy. Turns out Elva took him to the lake on the hill to bathe him. Seeing the wounds received by Percy in the fight with Iron Sadeo, she takes pity on him, and while he is thinking, she waters him. Percy asks Elva about the holy knights and she begins to repeat the same spell that his grandfather often muttered. He also asks about magic, and Elva explains that they have already shown him but their magic is not strong enough to make them holy knights. She says that his bravery and selflessness are good qualities of a holy knight. At the party, Percy drinks delicious berry juice and wonders why. Before can't drink alcohol, Ilna intervenes in the conversation, saying that Dan doesn't like to pretend to be an adult even though they are both only 16 years old. But when Percy admits that he is also 16, Danny and Ilna are very surprised. Ilna feels awkward, realizing that Percy deceived her by pretending to be younger, and they even swam in the lake together. They are interrupted by Bo, who runs up to Percy and thanks him for saving him and his grandfather later. Percy asks the villagers about the whereabouts of Ironside, but he just gets disappointed and angry that he even screams for Ironside to show up to him. Suddenly a black megalodon appears in the sky and says that he recognized Aaron's knight is already close, and he can't believe that Percy is alive because Ironside was supposed to kill him and his grandfather. He concludes that Ironside probably has a soft spot for his son. The fat man intervenes and demands that the knight apologize to Percy because he recently lost his grandfather. The knight knocks him down with one easy movement, saying that he doesn't care about him. A dark knight named Leghart seems to claim that he knew Percy's father and grandfather. In response, Percy demands to know where the Ironside knight is. Amazed at Percy's courage and is waiting for an answer, the inhabitants run away in fear when a fight breaks out between them and the Bo, who ran up to Percy earlier, encourages him. Percy rushes at the Black Knight and with a strong kick to the chest knocks him down. Surprised by the lack of weapons, Percy throws the knight back with a powerful blow. Paying attention to this, Percy continues to throw punches into the air, insisting that if he defeats Pelt, he will have to tell where his father is. But Pelt quickly responds with a blow, from which Percy falls to the ground, confidently stating that if he defeats Percy, he will have to go after him. Peck throws a blow, from which Percy flies to the side. Percy quickly rises to his feet, but Peck uses his weapon to catch him in the air. However, the simpleton manages to get out of the trap and quickly strikes Peleg's armor in the end. Telt grabs Percy by the head and covers his face with his huge hands. The poor boy hangs in the air trying to escape the knight's grip. Telt uses this advantage to talk about his admiration for Percy's bravery and his undying desire to save people, but he is not comfortable fighting without a weapon, so he tells Percy to use his magic to save himself, but the boy replies that he has no magic. Equally worthy of training to finish the fight, Pelt continues to beat Percy mercilessly. Donnie can no longer watch Percy almost being killed, so he takes out his sword, but Elva asks him to stay away given the exceptional power of the Peleg. Yes. A small boy comes out to support Percy, saying that he will not lose because he is a hero who saved the boy and his grandfather, and when it seems that there is no hope, a powerful beam of light bursts out of Percy's eyes, which throws the Peleg back with enormous force as Speed yes back, surprised that he claimed to have no magical abilities. However, it's hard to believe because now Percy's hands are emitting a strong mysterious energy that can only be explained by magic. Percy is in shock and begins to panic, trying to remove the aura emanating from his hands. He runs to Peleg to help him get rid of this thing, but the power coming from him aura from the Bros of the Sea. Our knight, seeing this, Danny tells Percy that he used this power to defeat the Black Knight because it is most likely his magic power. Peleg manages to get up and he asks what magic Percy just used on him. It could have been destruction magic, but since it came from his fists, it could have been spell magic. Percy makes a stupid gesture asking Peleg if he can use magic in this battle. After all, earlier he told the knight that he has no magic and he does not want to win by deceit. To Percy's surprise, he is surprised by his honesty and allows him to use magic. Percy is grateful and happy that he can now use magic. However, his friend Danny advises him to stop thanking his enemies every time he decides to win. Percy tells the knight that he finally knows where his father is, but Peleg does not want to give in to him so easily. He furiously rushes at him, releasing a fireball from his weapon. But before Percy can understand that what happens is a simple fireball turns into a fiery spiral and it becomes difficult for him. Naya from the attacks. The Ligard taunts him, claiming that Percy will not be able to win if he just dodges, but Percy surprises him by appearing behind him. The Black Knight immediately attacks, but the Peach concentrates his magic by squeezing his hands and blocks the blow, but the flames from the attack dissipate and envelop him in a fireball. Ligard says that his flames usually burn victims to ashes and do not go out until he will not cancel the spell. He tells the Persian to surrender in order to save himself from death, and even the Elva all to him to surrender, otherwise he will lose everything including his life. But the determined teenager refuses and envelops himself in the magic emanating from his body. This is shocking and impressive, sang Proud, because Percy only recently discovered this magical power in himself. Suddenly a small magical creature appears and presses the hands of the Sangerda, canceling the spell. Sang wrote in bewilderment. He does not understand how Percy guessed what if he gives up his hands then the spell will be broken. Even more surprising is that Percy's wounds immediately begin to heal while everyone watches in shock. The Black Knight tries to understand what kind of magic Percy used because it was neither destructive magic nor summoning magic nor degeneration magic nor healing magic. He comes to the conclusion that Percy has hero magic, because of which he will become a target for all enemies and that this must be avoided at all costs. While he ponders, Percy suddenly attacks, much to the surprise of the villagers, who now again believe in his ability to defeat the Ligard. At this moment the Ligard snatches the magical creatures from the grip with such force that Dan does not understand that the knight has not even used half of his power. The knight calls Percy novice and approaches him, but Dan does not see that this could be fatal for Percy, so he enters the battle and with the help of magic lifts the Ligard into the air, and Percy orders him to run Percy objects that he needs to find his father. And while they are arguing, the Ligard causes a powerful explosion that spreads beyond the battlefield, forcing the villagers flee, fearing that their village will burn to the ground. Unfortunately, Donnie suffered the most from the attack, but the Ligard says that this is for him because he intervened in a fight between two real men at this moment. The red fox that they saw earlier brings Percy his things and Sangor tries to drive her away. The fox quickly twirls its tail and a ball appears from it, which explodes, illuminating everything with a bright light. Percy and his friends immediately disappear, leaving behind the knight. They find themselves on the Dragon Spire in a few miles from the village. They are worried about the villagers and quickly return but freeze when the fox starts talking. She calls them idiots because the Ligard is only hunting for the two of them, and he does not care about the rest of the villagers. The fox asks Percy to follow her, promising to explain everything later because it is connected with Percy's father. Dany warns Percy not to trust the fox, but in response the fox says that the Ligard serves evil and is part of a group that is hunting the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. Oddly enough, this explains that although Four Knights do not exist, it will appear soon. The fox reveals the names of Four Knights: Famine, Plague, War and Death, holy knights who are destined to bring for disasters and destroy the world. Is shocking that one of these knights is Percy. Later the Knights of the Evil King discuss their conclusions about the Four Knights. It turns out that the Four Knights are not holy knights, but young men who serve as a holy knight. The information collected shows that one of the young men has magical power, another has evil and holiness in the eyes of the third, a mysterious giant with an ever-changing appearance, and the last one with green hair similar to Pace. Steve at this moment knocks on the table, realizing that his son is alone of the Four Knights and regrets that he did not check that Percy was dead. He is joined by Pelt, who expresses his disbelief that Ironsight did not get rid of Percy. Ironsight asks why Pelt did not kill Percy. Pelt explains that it would be stupid to deprive Percy of his power and that they could use the power of this young man and turn him into an ally. Having heard this, the Red Knight takes out his sword and reminds Pelt that Percy is dangerous not only for the king but for the whole world, and therefore Sang must diligently fulfill his duties as a royal knight on the back of a dragon. Percy refuses to admit that he is going to destroy the world, but the fox explains that the prophecy always comes true and tells him to listen to it. Percy still has doubts, but the fox tells him that his father and Sangor are in a city called Camelot. After hearing this, Dany warns Percy that he should not believe the fox because Camelot was destroyed many years ago by the Demon King and that the Demon King went into hiding with several of his loyal knights. The fox still claims that Camelot exists, but you can't get there through the usual routes, only through the kingdom of Leona. Percy doesn't listen to Dany's warning and agrees to go with the fox, who introduces himself as his son. Dany gives up and agrees to go with them to the kingdom of Leona. When they get to the end of the Dragon's Ridge, Percy's stomach rumbles loudly. He proposes to have a competition to see who can catch the most prey. Dany decides to even the odds by taking Percy's bow and arrows. Percy finds himself in and hearing the echo of his voice. He realizes that this is a great place for hunting. He sees small winged creatures that are surprised by the appearance of a man. Dany tries to shoot the prey, but misses and Sin mocks him. However, Dany says that he is still a better shot than Percy. He notices a deer and tries to shoot him, but an arrow flies past and they hear someone scream. Realizing that he perhaps accidentally hit someone, they run towards the sound and see a huge nun. Percy apologizes for hitting her and she replies that she was praying and was just scared. Arrows, while they are talking to winged creatures, report that in Echo Gorge they saw a person. Knowing who they are talking about, Daze asks what the problem is and they tell him the story of Echo Ko. Once it was a beautiful and lively place, but now it has turned into a nightmare. Percy has fun fighting with the monsters that attack him and is happy that he defeated Dany in the hunting game. He hears a cry for help from Forest, follows the sound and finds a mushroom house. When he opens the door, he sees a creature tied to a pole begging for mercy and two bows standing over him. He runs up to free the creature. One of the bows knocks him down and he hits his head. When he finally frees the creature, it flies out the window and Percy thinks that it is a fairy. He is so excited that he passes out. Dony and the others run to the canyon. The winged creatures explain that the demon living there, with the help of medicines from all the creatures in the canyon, they describe him as aggressive, like a medicine man named Nashion. When they approach the canyon, they think that they are already too late, because if Nashion has already captured Percy, then saving him is useless and all their efforts will be in vain. Sin says that they need to find Percy because if something happens to him, his head will roll. The winged creatures say that they need to hurry because Nashion is as terrible as they described him, because they saw how he turned harmless creatures into cruel monsters. When Percy wakes up, he finds himself in a room that looks like a laboratory, and dressed and tied to a chair. The first thing he is looking for is his helmet. Denine enters and is surprised that the test subject has already woken up. Although he should have slept for another 10 hours, Percy asks for his clothes to be returned to him, the helmet and cloak of nations. He explains that he usually keeps his subjects clean and Percy's clothes were torn, so he was forced to throw them away. But he reveals that Percy's helmet and cloak are safe and sound because they are rare objects with powerful magical powers. Then Nations approaches Percy and injects him with some medicine that should take effect in an hour. But after a few seconds, Percy's hair grows twice as long and he complains that his helmet won't fit now. After seeing this, Nations is impressed and immediately falls in love with his new one. Test subject who quickly responds to treatment. Percy remembers that Nation had blood on his lips and assumes that he bit the fairy, but Nations explains that he has a habit of biting his lips when he gets excited. When Donnie and the others enter the mouth, they are chased by bloodthirsty monsters. Disappointed, Donnie blames Nation for this and calls him a terrible villain, but this irritates our giant fairy and she throws a tantrum saying that not such a bad person. In the laboratory, Percy apologizes for misunderstanding NASA but says that he needs to leave. Na tells him that he can leave only after the next experiment for which the exact dosage is needed and that if something goes wrong Percy will die. Percy asks Nas why all these Nations cops are needed, explains that he has a mission that he must complete, but when he turns his head Percy has already freed himself and putting on his cloak tells Nas that he also has an important mission that he must complete. When Tony puts on his helmet Percy becomes furious, distracting the Nation. Nathan attacks him with two glowing swords and says that he needs test subjects for experiments and he can't use himself as a test subject because he has to save the gorge. What he explains, Percy sands his helmet to Nance and he flies off to the work table and Percy throws a bottle of medicine into Nation. As begs Percy to give him the bottle, but Percy doesn't want Nations to use it on another test subject and drinks the entire contents of the bottle. Percy immediately falls and Na asks why he did it. Percy begins to behave strangely and Na thinks that he mixed the medicine incorrectly, but when Percy gets up, he says that he feels an extraordinary surge of strength. He begins to run around the laboratory and even runs out into the street to scream like crazy. After hearing the echo of his voices, Donnie and Sin understand that everything is fine with him, although they are still running to him. Nations meets Percy outside and asks why he took such a risk because he could have died. Percy replies that while he was trying to save the gorge, he was ready to help him with anything. Percy asks about the results of his experiments and Nation says that it seems everything went well and immediately drinks the remains from the bottle. When the search party arrives, they are surprised to see that Percy is completely fine except for his terrible hair, and Nations lies in a semi-conscious state and mutters a name Ordo, which belonged to an old apothecary who once lived in the gorge. Ordo was a kind man who took care of all the creatures in the area, invited them to his home, and treated them when they were sick. One day, he found a baby in a basket and raised him in his home, teaching him all kinds of medicines. One day, Ordo disappeared from gorge and no one else saw him then, and began his crazy experiments. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, the same fairy that Percy saved earlier says that it is time to destroy the forest, and from a mysterious or a human hand appears, and the fairy addresses her like a Cordo. After a while, Nations finally rises to his feet and says that he urgently needs to spread the medicine throughout the gorge before it completely decomposes. Unexpectedly, the fairy throws a stone in his face and says that he wants to completely destroy the gorge. Other fairies join her, calling his demon who is responsible for the disappearance of Ordo. They ignore the pleas of the nun who claims that Xian is innocent and stop only when Percy stands between them and the stones. Percy explains that Xian was actually preparing a medicine to save the gorge. That as he speaks, purple smoke begins to envelop the entire forest, killing everything living in its path. Xian comes to the rescue when he magically creates a medicine from nothing and explains that when he takes any medicine, his body learns to reproduce it without additional ingredients. It was his own magical power, which he called the mixed poison. Gradually the medicine becomes greater and Xian orders everyone to close their mouths. At his command, the medicine spreads throughout the forest in the form of a fog that revives all living things in the gorge. They watch in amazement as the forest is reborn, and all thanks to the mad scientist Xian. Seeing this, Percy asks why Xian and calls is medicine poison, and Xian explains that any poisonous thing can be used for treatment and resurrection if it is studied correctly and mixed in the right proportion. This was taught to him by Ordo, whom he called his grandfather and whom he missed very much. Percy wishes him good luck and hopes that he will find his grandfather again. Later in the session, the nun gives Percy Mason's children's clothes, which fit him perfectly considering that he is only a couple of centimeters tall. Later, the fairies apologized to Mason for offending him because they thought that he was deliberately driving the monsters crazy. However, Xian explains that the madness of the monsters was just a side effect. The effect of the medicine They did not understand where these deadly fumes came from, and Ozzy said that they began to appear after the disappearance of Ordo. Slowly destroying the gorge, Percy ran up to her, rejoicing that he could put on Ozzy's old clothes, and the Asian told the fairies to stop apologizing to him and thanked Percy for becoming a victim, thanks to which they managed to create the medicine. The Red Fox said the Nazi fumes not only kill plants and animals, but also penetrate into the ground, destroying the soul, and here they saw a deformed body coming out of the canyon above, and before Put on Zhang said that it was his grandfather Ordo. When Ordo descended above, Zhang ran up to him, scared and not understanding why his grandfather looked like that, but the nun calmly stopped him so that he would not get into trouble, and Ordo again began to exude deadly purple fumes and the gorge began to rot faster. Mason escaped from the nun's hands and ran up to Ordo to ask why he was destroying the gorge, which Nordo once considered his home, muttered something about how he wanted to destroy the gorge and immediately grabbed the Nazi to choke him. Percy ran up to them, but the nun was able to stop him and pull him away from Moss. She shouted to Ordo to stop destroying his family, but he again exhaled poisonous fumes that instantly killed her. Moss screamed in pain, not understanding why his sister died, but then a fairy appeared and told him to shut up. Percy, in shock, he recognizes in him the fairy whom he saved from Nassau. A fairy continues to say that we were to blame for the tragedy because the saddest of the fairies always interfered with him. He says that death is wonderful and wonders us, and Ordo want to prevent it so much. Then the fairy calls Ordo a sinner and orders him to atone for his sins and destroy the gorge, so Ordo immediately rushes to the Nazis. But Percy quickly runs up and hits Ordo in the jaw, from which he momentarily loses his balance. When he sees this, Nazi falls into despair and doesn't know what to do next, but Percy hugs him tightly and that together they will save Ordo. Nazi has tears in her eyes, not knowing what to do next. Nazi and Percy are trying to figure out how to help Ordo. Sin says that they can easily change the situation by destroying the cause. Then the evil fairy orders Ordo to destroy the gorge, but suddenly an arrow hits her and she falls to the ground, where she is crushed by Ordo, who also falls. This raises questions for the others, who are trying to understand where it came from. Arrow until they are interrupted by a voice from above. The Holy Knight in gold and yellow armor reproaches them for breaking his toe and introduces himself as the Amber Knight Talisker. Recognizing him, Percy says that the Talisker must be another companion of Iron Seda. When the ZNS orders the knight to return his grandfather to a human form and demands to explain why he turned Ordo into a monster. Lisker challenges him to a fight, saying that if Nazi can inflict even one blow on him, he will do it at his request. The Red Fox warns them that they should not succumb to the ridicule of the magician, but he gladly agrees to fight. He takes out his magic blades Mbane and White Donna and calls on magic. Seeing that Nazi can turn his poison into objects, the knight asks if he has the magic of transformation and charm. Percy offers to help Nazi Sue, but he refuses, saying that this is a fight between magical creatures. To prove his magical abilities, Percy tries to summon his magic, but nothing works out for him. He tries more, but in the end he just farts. To everyone's amusement, that the Zenes thanks him for his efforts and then rushes at the Talisker. The knight calls down hail from the sky, which deals a devastating blow. Percy is saved again by Nazi, but before they can get to their feet, the Talisker orders Ordo to get rid of them. Ordo instantly swings at Nazi and knocks him down. The knight is pleased with his performance and orders Ordo finish off Nazi, but Percy intercepts the blow, telling Ordo not to blindly follow Lisk's orders. He reminds him that his grandson was protecting the crack for him, and when Ordo hears, his eyes become human again and tears appear in them. The Talisker is tired of all this emotional nonsense and is going to send them all to the afterlife, so Sin loses hope and prepares for the inevitable. The Amber Knight again calls for a hail strike, and seeing this, Percy takes to the air using Ordo as a support. He deflects the blow. Hail breaks the rocks into smaller pieces and ends up landing on his feet covered in bruises. The Talisker watches in shock, thinking that Percy has gone crazy, and Donnie flies up in time to catch Percy before he falls. The Seance asks Percy why he did that crazy move, but Percy says in the Seance not to lose faith in him, promising that his grandfather will become normal again, just as the Talisker says he's had enough of this farce. Percy begins to glow, to everyone's surprise. The magic turns into a spiraling beam of light that rises to the sky and disintegrates into tiny magical creatures and then merges into a large creature surrounding him. Scar mocks Percy's power, saying that he has never seen such disorganized magic, but Mason is both excited and puzzled to see how quickly Percy healed from terrible wounds, and when Percy assures him that he has indeed recovered, Donnie and the Red Fox are surprised at how much stronger and better his magic has become. While trying to destroy Percy, the Lisker summons a powerful hail, but to his surprise, Percy's large magical creature absorbs every piece of hail and quickly spits it back at Liz, knocking him back while he tries to escape the storm. Percy approaches the defeated knight and, before striking, reminds him that he must fulfill his promise and explain why he disfigured Ordo. In addition, he tells the Talisker that he is in for a good thrashing because he must keep his promise and turn Ordo back into a man. Angry at Percy, the Talisker rushes at him with his magic staff and tries to hit him several times, but cannot land a single blow. When it is Percy's turn to strike, the Talisker taunts him, saying that he will not be able to hit him without a weapon, but Percy turns his magic ball into a giant pawn and presses the Talisker to the ground and holds him while he asks why the Talisker disfigured Ordo, who was a kind and generous man. The Lisker replies that Ordo committed a grave sin against his master Arthur by saving other races besides humans. He says that Lord Arthur wants only humans to live on Earth and other races not to threaten their world. The Lisker continues that after several unsuccessful attempts to warn Ordo about disobeying Lord Arthur, he punished him by turning him into a disgusting monster driven by the desire to destroy and threaten the world. After Ordo's transformation into a monster, the Talisker ordered him to destroy the gorge, otherwise he would have to do it himself. After his confession, the Talisker breaks free from Percy's grasp, and, after listening to his ridiculous excuses, he becomes furious and declares that the Talisker was just playing on feelings. To Shion, not paying attention to Percy's words, the Talisker says that his magical power is the ability to control the weather, so he calls lightning from the sky and calls it the destroyer of storms. But Percy's ball absorbs all the lightning. Percy, unharmed from the attack, angrily attacks him. Alaskar says that he has no idea how painful it is to lose his grandfather without a good reason. The Talisker is shocked by how easily Percy turns these shocks of rebellion into his own magic and asks himself, what kind of person is Percy to be? This is great. At this moment he remembers the prophecy that was given about the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, and now, when he sees the green hair, that Percy is one of the Four Knights. To avoid being hit Percy, the Talisker jumps back, thinking to himself how lucky he must be to come face to face with one of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. He imagines how lucky the king would be if he can destroy one of the knights who are predicted to threaten his life. When the Talisker flies high into the air, Sin tells Percy that his magic shapes everything he thinks about, so he should imagine a weapon which could knock him off his feet. There's a Lisker. Either way, Danny warns him to put in anything but an arrow. Knowing how terrible of a shot he is, Lisker summons hail in the shape of a burr, which he calls the Bird of Distress. Since Percy remembers how he defeated the bird with the stone on the lady's finger, he immediately cuts the Bird of Distress by creating a sword using his magic. While the Talisker expresses his surprise at this, Percy throws his magic sword at him, which hits him in the chest and crashes into the mountain, not believing his eyes. The Talisker curses the Persians and wonders how powerful the Four Knights of the Apocalypse must be. Seeing this, Danny cannot believe his eyes, since Percy destroyed the Holy Knight along with the entire mountain. Sin asks Percy to turn off his magic since he has already defeated the Holy Knight, but Percy, as always, does not understand what is happening. Sin expresses his disappointment, and Donnie and Na are shocked by the sudden appearance of a giant nun. HNS is glad to see his sister alive and asks if she is okay, but gets upset when Donnie calls her a giant zombie. Sin explains that she turned black due to the large amount of metal in her genes. He says that the clan of giants can defend themselves with metal when they are in danger. Slowly she sheds the metal coating and returns to normal. She apologizes to Nation Som for making him worrying and says that she is fine. Seeing that Ordo is still in the form of a monster, Na remembers that his grandfather dreamed of turning the gorge into a first aid kit for all kinds of creatures. He wanted to turn it into a first aid kit of Britain for all kinds of creatures. Nations cries, and Percy apologizes for not being able to turn Ordo back into a human. Fortunately, Sin finds Lisk's magic staff that she dropped when Percy sent her to the other side of the world. He breaks the staff, breaking the spells, transformed into human form, shocking everyone. His brothers and sister cry with joy, and Na hugs his grandfather tightly, while Percy watches with a sense of accomplishment. After their joyful reunion meeting, Donnie teases Nation for crying like a little girl despite his stern and straightforward character. Persia, however, defends him by saying that he is just glad to see his grandfather again. When Donnie asks about the staff that turned Ordo into the monster, Sin explains that it is a staff of chaos filled with chaotic power that the King of Camelot gave to the knights. Donnie again asks why the knights should carry such a destructive staff with them, but Sin gets tired of the questions and asks him to leave him alone and go ask the knight himself. Full of determination, Percy announces that now he has changed his plans. Initially, he was going to deal with his father to avenge the death of his grandfather, but now he decided to win the favor of the Kami King Moda so that he would not subject anyone else to the same experience. Sin praises him for his determination but corrects him that the city is called Camelot and not Kami, as Percy said. Percy remembers the hunt and talks about his victories, but Don does not want them to forget about it because he has never killed a single animal. To their surprise, Sin declares himself the winner, showing them to the rabbits at the tent. Ultramarine is one of the most valuable creatures. Sin reminds them that the winner can give away to the losers and is about to give an order, but suddenly appears on Yan, saying that he wants to go with them because he is indebted to Percy for helping him save his grandfather and the gorge. He also says that Ordo told him to explore the world